I'm really not sure where to start at with this video. It's kind of a wrestling match, I guess you would say. In one corner we have Bryan Lunduke, and in the other corner we have the Gnome Foundation or Gnome Foundation, whichever you prefer. It's very interesting. So Bryan Lunduke is a journalist, and he has the Lunduke Journal that he regularly posts to. And he created a post recently that is interesting. But before we get into that, who exactly is Bryan Lunduke and what is he most notable for? Years back, he did a YouTube video called Linux Sucks. If you haven't had a chance to see it, I highly recommend you go watch it. It's a really cool YouTube video about things that Linux needs to do, or at least should try to do, that need to be fixed. And I would say, yeah, some of those I agree with. And he got popular on YouTube, sort of popular. But then he decided to leave YouTube, and apparently now he's back putting his articles on YouTube along with a video. He did this video about Linux Foundation that really is a little bit rough around the edges, and we're going to watch part of that video today. And I wanted to see what your opinion is and whether or not you think what he's saying is justified. And I'll give a couple of comments in between. We're not going to watch the whole video. We're only going to watch part of it. So I will put the link down in my description if you want to see the whole video. If you're a GNOME or GNOME user, I recommend you go watch the video. But it's not something you must watch because you're fearful of the GNOME Foundation going belly up. I don't think that's going to happen, but anyway, let's get started. If you don't know about the Gnome Foundation, it's a non-profit organization. Its whole purpose is to basically create the infrastructure for the GNOME project. So simple things like voice and communications, that first one you see here. That's more important than you think. You know, when you've got developers working on GNOME itself, they don't have a whole lot of time to respond to public requests for information or, you know, just the general stuff that happens on a day-to-day basis. So the foundation relieves them of that to some extent. Probably the most important thing is infrastructure and collaboration. This is really quite important. So the foundation provides infrastructure services, email communication, hosting servers. That would be pretty sticky if they did have a problem with that. If they ran out of money and the GNOME Foundation couldn't run anymore, that would hurt. The project definitely would have a problem. Education and advocacy. The foundation wants the public to learn and understand about GNOME and open source software. It tries to provide resources that kind of encourage this widespread adoption of understanding their software. I'm curious how many GNOME Foundation published documents you've seen or videos coming from the GNOME Foundation specifically. I've seen none. But, you know, you can go to the website and have a look at different things that GNOME Foundation does. So the two big conferences that they have do not take place in the United States. One, of course, is in Asia, GNOME Asia, and then GUADEC, which stands for GNOME Users and Developers European Conference. This time it was in actually Eastern Europe, in Latvia. Let's have a look at Bryan's video. Is the GNOME Foundation going to be bankrupt in 1 year?
Buckle up, Buttercup, because the Gnome Foundation is just about out of money. They could be bankrupt within the year. Yeah, the biggest Linux desktop on Earth could be just about plumb out of cash. And the plan to fix it apparently involves a shaman and sustainability, diversity, and inclusion. This is real. This story just broke by the Lunduke Journal, naturally, just a couple hours ago. I'm going to read the article to you now. There's a ton of details in here. I went through a lot of paperwork to get this all figured out, and I have some additional things to say as well. It's no secret that many open source organizations struggle to fund themselves, with the Gnome Foundation being one of the more on more of a shoestring budget than you would expect for a project as widely used as Gnome. Red Hat Enterprise Linux, SUSE Linux Enterprise, Ubuntu. It seems like every major professional enterprisey Linux distribution uses Gnome. It's a pretty big deal. But to make matters worse, the Gnome Foundation has been paying for most of their expenses, not a little bit, but most, by draining their savings account, as they spend far more than they have been taking in. Now, apparently, those savings are about...
So, based on the public records, the tax filings that they put in, he would be right. The foundation has been spending more money that they bring in. And they talk a little bit later, well, he talks a little bit later about the foundation and how it's been spending the money and how long they think they have left on the current amount of money they have.
Out to run out. What's more, the Gnome Foundation has been unusually silent about their operations, not publishing any public reports for closing in on 2 years now. And there's...
He says that a lot. Haven't been filing or published anything about their finances in the last 2 years, but as far as I can tell, the 2022-2023 was released at some point the end of the fiscal year, which would have been September of 2023. So their fiscal year is October through the following September the next year. And to me, it sounds like they just released their report recently. So another report shouldn't be due yet. The 2023 and 24 year started in October of 2023 and should conclude in September of 2024. So I don't know where he gets this 2-year thing.
Strategy to save themselves from bankruptcy, this is real, appears to center around sustainability, diversity, and inclusion. What that has to do with saving a business monetarily, I don't know, but I'm here to report on it for you. This is all very real. None of this is parody. None of this is made up. This is everything that's really happening. Now, from an April 26th, that was 3 days ago, announcement from the Gnome Foundation president, Robert McQueen.
What he's about to talk about is basically the only thing that he has positively from the foundation that actually leads him to believe that they're running out of money. I'll let you listen to this.
He said, quote, "As you may be aware, the Gnome Foundation has operated at a deficit, nonprofit speak for a loss, i.e. spending more than we've been raising each year for over 3 years, essentially running the foundation on reserves from some substantial donations received 4 to 5 years ago. The foundation has a reserves policy which specifies a minimum amount of money we have to keep in our accounts. This is so that if there is a significant interruption to our usual income, we can preserve our core operations while we work on new funding sources." This is the important part. We've now, quote, "hit the buffers of this reserves policy," meaning the board cannot approve any more deficit budgets. To keep spending at the same level, we must increase our income. In short, Gnome has run out of money.
Okay, that's fairly accurate. That's probably the best piece of information we're going to get from the foundation. That's a rough one. So they have run out of money. Now, Bryan goes into some Bryan fuzzy logic to determine what's left of that money. How much money do they have left in the account, in the kitty, and how long can they hope to run on it before they run dry?
Of the Gnome Foundation and what they find themselves in. Let's take a look at what we know about their finances. Unfortunately, the Gnome Foundation has not published any data at all in close to 2 years.
There's that again.
Published an annual report for 2023 last year, and their most recent IRS records only cover their fiscal year up through September of 2022. Now, we're only a few months away from the summer of 2024, which means we're almost 2 years since we've gotten any data out of the Gnome Foundation, which means
if you're in the business and you have a answer to this, I don't know when a corporation, whether for a nonprofit, is required to give their report to the IRS. So this may be normal. He hasn't talked about previous years or when we could expect that report. I can't imagine they're late, but I don't know.
We're forced to look at previous year's data and extrapolate forward based on what information we do have. Now, here's a set of data on expenditures and revenue from 2021 and 2022 from the Gnome Foundation's annual report that was supplied almost 2 years back. In short, the total expenses for the Gnome Foundation, this is what they were. In 2021, it was a little bit over $900,000, and in 2022, it reduced a bit to about $659,000. Now, the revenue for those same years was a lot lower. In 2021, we have $286,000, and in 2022, we have $363,000. Now, the important thing to notice here is that the expenses far exceed the revenue by a huge amount. That is not good. Everyone knows.
Okay, so again, some good facts here. He is correct, but I would like to point out that whoever was in control and not president, but executive director, had worked with the board extremely diligently to bring this down, almost $300,000. That's a ton. So expenses went down. That's a good thing. And we're going to look at a different document where we can see that income has went up, which is also another good thing.
That is not good. It's not good for a house. It's not good for a business. It's not good for a nonprofit. If you spend more money than you take in, you got a problem. So if we subtract the expenses from the revenue, you have the net income, right? Or net losses. And boy, howdy, is it deep into the negative. Deep, 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 deep. Which means this is the amount, what follows, that they need to take out of their savings every year just to keep the lights on. In 2021, they pulled out of savings $640,000 in order to keep going. In 2022, they pulled out less. They pulled out $296,000, so just shy of.
It's actually really good.
Now, we know that Gnome is burning.
So 2022, they actually did far better than 2021. They're, as far as I'm concerned, they're on target to, if they can reduce that again in 2023 when the report comes through, they'll be looking pretty good. This is a deficit, which means the budgeted amount and the amount they're spending is higher than what was budgeted. But I think looking at this, if it were me and I was a stakeholder like Red Hat or whatever, I would say things look really good. Okay. Currently at 2022, they don't look really good, but they're getting better at least.
Through between, about $300,000 and $640,000 of savings per year, which begs the question, how much do they have left in terms of cash reserves? So let's look at.
All right, I'm going to bounce this forward because there's about 20 minutes of fuzzy math, which is no fun. And we'll look at what he assumes based on all of his interesting comments as to what exactly they have left and how long they can survive.
How much savings and temporary cash investments they have. Those are the key words we're looking for here. In other words, how much money can Gnome get their hands on in short notice to actively use for funding their immediate expenses, right? How much can they grab in cash to pay the bills, right? We're not looking at, various types of assets. We're looking at cash or cash equivalents, essentially. And for that, we'll need to look a few pages further down the IRS 990 form at this particular line. Savings and temporary cash investments. Boom, there we go. $765,011. So $765,000. That's how much the Gnome Foundation had in September of 22 in available savings and cash on hand. Now, how much money does Gnome have left today, right? We're near the end of April of 2024. We're almost 2 years after that at that line. And we know from the statements from the president of the Gnome Foundation that they've continued since then to be burning through savings. Well, being as we don't have a lot of that data, we're going to need to make some assumptions based on the data above. So, if their numbers have stayed consistent since September of 2022, which is a big if, this means that the Gnome Foundation has enough funds to continue current operations through April of 2025, at which point the Gnome Foundation will need to significantly scale back their expenditures. And when I'm saying significantly, I mean they will be forced to lay off the majority of their staff.
Okay, before we go on with Brian's video, I wanted to take a look at once again, go back to the annual report and have a look at what they reported to the stakeholders, and anybody that is interested can look at the Gnome report. All right, on page 12, we're looking at finances at a glance. So, you know, they're trying to show this in the best possible light, so you have to keep that in mind. But check this out. $363,000 in 2022, but in 2023, they had a little over $556,000 come in. And I would like to say, look at the purple group here. So the fundraising went up considerably compared to 2022. So look at that fundraising. The bad news is the expenses. I found this interesting as to what is costing the most amount of money, and it looks like conferences have went up significantly last year, and these are conferences that Guh-Nome actually holds, the foundation creates. It might also, you know, include visitation to other conferences that they want to be a part of. Difficult to say. I'm not sure how they managed this. They literally dropped support and infrastructure about half as much. I really would like to have been a fly on the wall in that meeting, because I was a director of a nonprofit as well, and that's a significant drop, not just in hardware, but probably support. It says right here, support and infrastructure, people. That's scary. Outreach expenses went up a little bit. That's reasonable. I honestly am not sure what GIMP is. So if you do know, let me know, because expenses went up about 6 times on that. Administrative actually went down. I think if they're going to be realistic and they're still losing money, that administration level is going to have to go down, I would say, half of what it is. Fundraising costs to make the money they made, even that has went down, but I think they should be careful on that line item. We don't want to drop the expenses too much, because right now the key income that they're getting comes from fundraising. So if they can't get out there because they don't have the money in the budget for it, they can't make money, right? Does that make sense? Okay. So let's see what Brian's got up his sleeve.
That's 1 year from today, give or take. That's 1 year. According to all available public records and meshing with the statements made by Gnome, the few statements we have, the Gnome Foundation has 1 year left to live. That's according to the data and the statements made. Holy heavens. The biggest desktop environment in the Linux world, the one used by...
Okay, I'll give it to him. The probably the statements that have been released from the president of the foundation are the most concerning. We haven't seen the next reports that'll be coming up. And if I had been him, I would have waited to see what the next report looks like, because that will really be an eye-opener. So the foundation hired a new executive director, Holly Million, and she was somewhat of a curious acquisition for the foundation. She doesn't really have any open source background or any technology software development type background. That in itself is not the end of the world, because what she does have is fundraising experience, and that is a key element that the foundation is looking to fill. They really need to go after that. But let's listen to what he has to say about the executive director and what her plans are for moving forward.
First, what is a new executive director doing to save Gnome? And now, some of you may remember this. In October of 2023, last year, the Gnome Foundation hired a new executive director, a person whose previous job was a self-described, quote, professional shaman. Now, I need to be clear about this. This is not a religiously associated shaman. This has nothing to do with shamanism, right? This has nothing to do with the culture, the religion, none of it, none of that. This person sold flavored shaman water, right? Shaman that she made in her kitchen in a thing. She showed videos about how she makes shaman water. Make of that what you will. That's what this person did before becoming the executive director of Gnome. Now, in the half year since that time, the new Gnome executive director, whose name is Holly Million, has had very little public presence. There have been no blog posts, except for one. At the very beginning, when she first joined, it was a very generic, short, I'm the new executive director blog post, and then total radio silence since then. There's been no social media activity, no major interviews, no responses to press requests at all that I'm aware of. Totally quiet. Radio silence.
For the executive director, that's not really customary. You do expect some kind of public outreach so that they know what's going on, and the market begins to feel more confident. The stakeholders feel more confident into what's going on with the organization. And if you're asking the stakeholders for more money, they want to see your best foot forward, so to speak. Although, if she doesn't do that, it's not the end of the world. Also, she's only been there 6 months. So I don't really think that in the 6-month period she's been there, she's done too poorly, because we really don't know what she's doing. It's still going to take some time for her to get started.
The one publicly held event, which was a meet and greet. This is a real thing. This is ridiculous. They held a meet and greet with the Gnome Foundation's new executive director a few weeks after she joined the Gnome Foundation, right?
All right, he's just complaining that he went to the meet and greet and they all of a sudden canceled it. And he thinks they kicked out all the news people, but he's only sure that they kicked him out. I don't know, suspicious. Okay, so this Regina Kencor is apparently the vice president of the board, and she comes out with this tweet. Check it out.
Full tweet, because this is the only information we have, so you might as well enjoy every word of it. It's another time of the year for an in-person board meeting, and I'm quite excited about the progressive conversation we had with the executive director, Holly Million. We engaged in extensive discussions regarding the strategic direction of Gnome, focusing on, and here's the focus, sustainability, diversity, and inclusion. The future looks green. Shamrock emoji, hashtag, I'm just going to read this last hashtag here because it's very funny to me. Hashtag technology. Okay.
Okay, he goes on laughing for several minutes, but the first thing is Regina is the vice president of the board, and she's the one who put out this tweet. So these are not the words of the executive director. Secondly, the first item there in the hashtag sustainability, that is pretty much one of the key tenets of any organization, whether they're profit or nonprofit. This is something that as an executive director, you would definitely be looking into and determining what you could do to not just make sure this organization had some money in its coffers for 3 or 4 years like they did with a significant contribution back in 2020, I believe it was. They got quite a bit of money and they've been living on it. So it sounds like they didn't work too hard on fundraising because, well, they had this money. What's the hurry? Well, if I was the director, I definitely would want to get in a position where the money is coming in every year and we know the process and the strategy to continue making that money. Diversity and inclusion. What can I say? Those are buzzwords in corporate America right now and in nonprofit America. So why not use them? If you're asking other organizations and companies, some for profit, some nonprofit, for some money, help to their budget, fundraising, why not say one of the key things we do is work at diversity and inclusion when we're raising money, because we want to make sure that our organization shows that we have this diversity. And if you give us money, it will show that you are supporting diversity and inclusion. I'm not saying it's right, okay? And I'm not saying these terms are necessarily the best ones to use, but they came from the VP. The first one is spot on. The second two, well, let's say you're a company that just laid off all their DEI employees. They're looking pretty bad. They got egg on their face. It drops their budget by millions of dollars, but they still want to look good. Hey, I got an idea. Let's put some money, let's contribute some money to the Gnome Foundation, a couple $100,000, and we can put that feather in our cap and say, we did this. We assisted the Gnome Foundation in continuing on its mission to provide diversity, inclusion, and a good working environment for anyone. That sounds really good, doesn't it?
Let's put everything else aside for a minute. Hashtag technology. Hashtag technology, guys. What? Okay, I'm sorry. I gotta move on. I'm not here to make fun.
I didn't find anything funny about the hashtag technology. He seemed to think it was really funny. I think that it doesn't really cover all the bases because everybody uses technology, but whatever. I mean, to me, it doesn't do any good, but it doesn't do any harm either.
Fun. This is the Gnome Foundation board, with everyone sitting around a table. Hashtag technology. The future looks green. Shamrock emoji. All right. So that was from the Gnome Vice President Regina Nkenkor. From what little information we have, it appears that the Gnome profitability efforts are centered around sustainability, diversity, and inclusion, and hashtag technology with the shamrock emoji. That's all we've got. That's it. That's all the only information, everybody. Now, you may be asking, how does that result in the Gnome not going out of business? And I would.
So he keeps going on about these terms, and I want to move forward a little bit. He is saying sustainability, diversity, and inclusion. He's saying those are her words. He's going to run with that. Let's cruise over to 21. He has some questions. Let's see what he's got.
Fundraising, financial reporting. This sounds like a massive massive, unmitigated failure of all three goals. Communications, she has not communicated at all. Fundraising, she has done no fundraising at all. Financial reporting, Gnome is actually going slower on providing information publicly than before. We have no information at all. Nothing. Total failure across the board. And their plan to turn things around sounds like it centers on sustainability, diversity, and inclusion, which is not exactly.
Again, with the sustainability, diversity, and inclusion, her real goals, though, as came out in the public releases, communications, fundraising, financial reporting, and I believe another one was financial controls. So what would financial controls be useful for? We could create and draft policies to monitor and put a stop to funding that the organization just can't afford. So what would be an example? Flights. You know, there should be a limit to the amount of flights that staff can take to get to conferences and do certain work. We prioritize which ones we want to do, which is usually probably going to be the official Gnome Foundation conferences. And once they're out of money, they can't just grab a couple $100,000 from another line item in the budget and spend it anyway. So that's really useful.
A strong business plan. Whatever you think of those words, doesn't matter. That's not a business plan. That's not a fundraising plan. So what happens now?
All right, let's bounce forward. Going to take you to 29 minutes. All right, here we go. So these are questions Lunduke wants answers to.
This new, let's just call it a little financial dip. But the actions of the Gnome Foundation raise some serious concerns and doubts that will have a happy ending this time. And I want to read a couple of questions to you because these are just some of the questions I have. Why is the Gnome Foundation staying so secretive? They publish no plans. I know they've said they will publish plans, but they haven't so far. No communication at all from their executive director. And no published recent reports, nothing. We have nothing to go on here. Why? It's worth asking. At this point, we should have gotten some additional information, but we haven't. Why?
I think that's a really good question. And one of my concerns is because there's no information coming out except for the vice president's tweet she put out, is that kind of like the movie Titanic or The Real Thing. They know that the Titanic is going to sink, and they ask the guy who created the Titanic, created the plans for the Titanic, and he says, she's got an hour and a half and she's going to founder. I'm wondering if all of the powers that be inside the foundation know that something is going to happen and it's not a good thing, and they just want to let the sinking ship go down and, like rats, scurry off the ship if they can. I'm not saying that's what's happening. It just, you know, there should be something. We should be hearing something. Now, allegedly, there's going to be a strategic plan that's coming out by the executive director. That's a 5-year plan. I would be very curious to see that. Presumably, we're going to see the tax information come out for the last fiscal year. We need to see that. And their general annual report. Those are 3 documents we really need to see.
The only known details of their secret plan, their super top secret plan to avert a shutdown, they're not even dropping breadcrumbs here. This is the only bit we know, is that it involves sustainability, diversity, and inclusion. That can't be real, can it? Like, no serious software foundation would stare into the abyss, be looking at a train heading straight for their face of possible bankruptcy, and then they make sustainability, diversity, and inclusion a significant part of their strategy to not get hit by the bankruptcy train. No No serious executive director would do that. No serious business person would do that. No serious financial organization.
The executive director hasn't done that. Probably the most concerning thing is we don't know what she's doing because there has been no public information released. However, this director has only been in place for 6 months. Think about that. October of 2023. If the ship is sinking, there's very little you can do in 6 months. There's much more work that's required here. And the first thing, top page on the book, is secure funding, emergency funding to keep the system afloat long enough to go out and do fundraising properly and make enough money to do the sustainability part of it.
No serious software foundation. None of them would ever do that. Not ever. I mean, you can't be serious and make that how you're going to keep from dying, right? Because we're not talking about them being in a good position so now they can take on social justice causes. No, that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about how do they keep the lights on and pay their employees. Well, they know they're not going to be able to, possibly starting right away. So they're going to have some sustainability and diversity, a little bit of inclusion. Oh, now we've got $1 bazillion.
He goes on and on about this. I'm going to jump to the last thing I wanted to point out.
It doesn't work that way. They know that. So what? Is that a joke? Is that a bankrolls? They were like super jazzed to tell everyone about that. And clearly they're saying they're running out of money. So why hasn't there been any fundraising? Supposedly the new executive director is great at fundraising. Why is that? Now, considering, really think about this for a moment. Considering GNOME's unique place in the Linux and open source world, have they not done this? Why have the large Linux and open source companies, and the Linux Foundation included, not gotten involved? What is going on here? Is there a conflict of some kind we're unaware of? Do they want the Gnome Foundation to not succeed? I mean, if that's possible. I don't know. I don't know the answer to this. It doesn't make any sense to me.
That's a good question, but a couple of things. Businesses don't want to invest in something that's tanking, or something I was wondering, an organization like Red Hat that's doing quite well for itself. Maybe they want to see the foundation tank and then take over project management. It's possible.
If the Gnome Foundation board and the executive director were worth anything, they would already, I mean, if they were doing the bare minimum of their jobs, bare minimum, they would have already gone to all of those companies we just talked about, the Linux Foundation and more, with their hat in hand and talk.
See, he doesn't know what the executive director's been doing or the board or anything. So maybe that's what they're doing, and maybe they don't have time to sit around and talk about it or reply back to one pundit who wants to know what's going on over there.
About ways they can cooperate together more, ways they can get more funding, etc. That would already be happening. So we can either assume two things have happened. Either one, the Gnome Foundation and executive director have done nothing at all except
all supposition. Let's go forward to the last thing. I thought it was kind of funny. I think he predicts his own problems coming up. Okay, here we go.
GNOME are. I'm going to be honest about it. Now, a lot of people are going to see this little short video I've recorded and the article I put out here as being extremely negative towards the Gnome Foundation. They're going to point to it, and that people are going to call me names because of it. Undoubtedly, that always happens when I criticize the Gnome Foundation. Always, every single time. In fact, oftentimes I get called horrible names simply by talking about my thoughts relating to the Gnome Foundation leadership. Just simply reporting on it. But despite all of that, I truly hope the Gnome Foundation pulls this together. I want them to stay afloat. I want them to stay in business, and I want to see them.
Okay, well, there you have it. I hope you go back and watch the entire video and see what you can get from it, and read the document, the article that he wrote, and gather your own conclusions. I like Bryan Lunduke. Sometimes I feel like he's raising the fire alarm a little bit too quickly sometimes, and that's just my opinion. There's a lot of valid stuff in this article and video that he talks about, and you gotta decide, you know, gather your own opinions about it. I feel like the Gnome Foundation could be a little bit more public facing. So they have this executive director. She at very least has a department, at least one person that could put out public press releases, you would think anyway. These are things that are important to know, especially when you have a new director that is, I'm not going to say untried. She has a lot of experience in fundraising, but it's new for her working in technology. So maybe a couple of releases saying how it's going might be a good idea. A lot of Bryan's video and article are based on supposition, things we don't know because we don't have the information yet. And you could say that about any organization, especially if things are going poorly. They're going to wait and hopefully come out with a win situation, and then they're going to publicize that. I would like it if you could check out the video and get your take on it. I'm very interested to hear what you think. So this is my 2 cents. Hope you enjoyed the video. I will see you next time on Fast Gadgets.